third graders. Today I have the story The Thornbush written by Michael Laughlin and illustrated by Richard Sturgles. And it's another one of my favorites. They're all my favorites, right? It's another one of my favorite Easter stories, and it's very similar to The Little Rose of Sharon in that it's written from the perspective of a plant. Okay, this was written from the perspective of the Rose of Sharon. This is written from the perspective of the thornbush that was the crown on Jesus' head. And so, we've talked about that this year in literature, how when something that's not a person has feelings or thoughts or actions in a story, we call that what? We call it personification. And so these two stories are very, very similar in that way, in that they're both examples of personification. So I hope you'll enjoy this story with me. When I would read this story to my fourth graders, I would challenge them, after we read the story, to write an Easter story from the perspective of something else in the Easter story. And some of them, one fourth grader wrote from the perspective of the tomb, how the tomb was talking. One wrote Easter from a horse's point of view. I think at one point I had a student write it from the perspective of a nail. And so if this is an optional, if you would like to write an Easter story from the perspective of something in the Easter story, and how they're watching. And I remember the Easter story is Jesus died and he rose again. That is the Easter story in a nutshell, okay? So you want to make sure you have both of those parts, that he died and that he rose again, if you want to make your Easter story. And I would love to read it. You know I would love to read it. So enjoy The Thornbush. The thornbush stared up at the moonlit sky, waiting for the warmth of the dawn. Its tiny flowers huddled together against the cold. Finally, the little bush drifted off to sleep. The ragged little bush grew between the stones at the edge of a narrow street that led to a grand palace. Its thorns were sharp and its flowers were too small to be admired. Children never picked its blossoms, and travelers avoided the prickly bush. The thorn bush felt ugly and unwanted. A rooster crowed. Harsh voices stirred the thorn bush from its sleep. A crowd pushed a man through the quiet streets toward the palace. His hands were tied, but he showed no anger. The man stopped in front of the little bush. His gentle gaze made the bush feel warm and cared for. No one had ever shown such kindness to the thorn bush. A moment later, the shouting crowd forced the man to move on. Out of the shadows came another man. As he passed, a silver coin fell to the ground. It rolled beneath the thorn bush. The man knelt to pick it up. His face was sad, and he began to weep. His tears fell on the thorn bush. Oh, how I wish I could comfort him, thought the little bush, but my thorns will only pierce him more. The man stumbled off and did not return. People began to gather outside the palace. A soldier walked through the crowd toward the little thorn bush. The morning sunlight reflected off the soldier's raised sword. With a single swing of the sharp weapon, several branches fell from the little bush. The soldier gathered the cuttings and returned to the palace. Why would anyone want my ugly thorns? The thorn bush wondered. The sun rose high in the morning sky. People began to shout as a man limped through the palace gates. "Behold your King Jesus," laughed the soldiers. "Who says he is the Son of God? Crucify him," yelled the angry mob. The little bush shuddered. It was the man with the kind face. He was struggling to drag a heavy wooden cross over the rough stone street. As the man reached the thorn bush, he stumbled and fell to his knees. He turned a tired face toward the little bush. Even though he will soon die on that cross, his eyes are filled with kindness, the little bush thought. The thorn bush recognized its own spiked branches weaved into a thorny crown upon the man's head. A drop of blood fell from the man's forehead into one of the bush's small yellow blooms. The stained flower fell to the ground. It was a long, sad day when all the people finally went home and the street was deserted. The thorn bush bowed in sorrow. It was ashamed of the pain its thorns had caused the man with the cross. For 2 days, the thorn bush refused to bloom. Morning dew fell like tears from its trembling branches. The little bush bent low to examine the fallen flowers beneath it. Only one remained fresh, the flower stained by the blood of the man with the crown of thorns. On the 3rd day after the man came, the bush was awakened by a beautiful dove. The graceful bird flew down to rest among the thorn bush's branches. "He's alive!" cried a woman as she hurried through the streets. "Jesus is risen!" The thorn bush was amazed. Could the kind man really have risen from the dead? Warm sunshine poured over the little bush. Its broken branches began to bud. Once more, the thorn bush thought of the loving kindness shown by the man with the gentle eyes, the man they called Jesus. The thorn bush selected its most delicate bloom and held it high in the morning sun. Slowly, the golden bloom opened, revealing a touch of red deep within the small blossom, as though it had been stained by a droplet of Jesus' blood. The thorn bush rejoiced. The man Jesus had died but lived again. He truly is God's Son. Jesus' only crown had been woven from the branches of the little thorn bush. But that crown was greater than silver or gold. It was the crown of the King of Kings, Jesus. And that's the end of the thorn bush. And if we were together in class, I would draw, I love Venn diagrams. And if we were together in class, I would draw a Venn diagram with these 2 books on there, and we would compare and contrast them. But I want you to think about it because I want you to think about how they're similar. We've already talked about how they both have a plant that has feelings and thoughts, okay? They both are about the Easter story. But I want to ask you this question. How do both authors portray God and Jesus in both of those stories? I want you to think about that for a second. How do both authors portray God or Jesus in these stories? What is the feeling you get about in this book it was Jesus, in this book it was her creator. Okay? And what feeling do you get? Think about some words. Do you feel warm? Both the little rose of Sharon and the thorn bush, both felt such warmth when the creator or when Jesus stopped and looked at the bush or the thorn bush or the little rose of Sharon. And so the way that the authors both presented God and Jesus, which it's like an egg, 3 in 1, right? They all just have different functions. We'll say the way that the author presents the Trinity, okay, is just with such strength and such love and such kindness and such warmth. And so if you're going to write a story, an Easter story, from the perspective of something else in the Easter story, remember to pay close attention to how you paint our Savior. All right. Love you guys.